My son ignored his mother's funeral, saying it wasn't worth his time. While I laid my wife to rest, he relaxed on the beaches of Florida. A week later, he called me in a panic. "Dad, the mortgage isn't paid." My reply was cold. "I don't care anymore." He was stunned, but that was only the start. Before we go on, please subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments what time it is where you are right now. I stared at my phone, dialing Timothy for the fourth time in half an hour. My hands shook. The funeral director's sympathetic glance made my chest tighten, but I forced myself to focus on Margaret's casket. The polished oak shone under the gray sky, white lilies draped across brass handles catching the weak sunlight through thick clouds. The phone rang again and again. Guests began arriving in black cars, their hushed voices mingling with the hum of lawn equipment in the distance. Aunt May clutched a tissue, eyes swollen. Cousin Robert checked his watch, adjusting his tie. Everyone seemed prepared for their part in this farewell. Everyone but my son. Finally, Timothy's voice broke through after the sixth ring. Something felt wrong immediately. Laughter, music, and chatter echoed in the background. "Timothy, where are you? The service starts in 30 minutes. Silence, then more noise waves. "Dad, I can't come. I have business to take care of." His words struck like ice. I tightened my grip on Margaret's casket. She always knew how to reach him when I couldn't. "What could be more important than your mother's funeral?" Another pause. When he finally spoke, his tone was sharp, dismissive. "Honestly, this isn't worth my time. Stop calling me." The call ended abruptly. I stared at the black screen, his words echoing. Not worth his time. Margaret had once driven 6 hours through a snowstorm to be by his side when he fell ill. She had skipped family gatherings to support him at work events. She excused his absence during 3 consecutive Christmases. And now this raindrops mingled with my tears as the funeral director approached gently. "Mr. Cole, it's time to begin seating the family." I slipped the phone into my pocket and forced myself to greet relatives, repeating the usual condolences. "Thank you for coming." She would have appreciated this. My thoughts, however, stayed fixed on Timothy's rejection. Aunt May leaned close. "Where's Timothy?" "I haven't seen him. He'll be along." I lied, the words sour in my mouth. "Important business." Margaret deserved truth, but I couldn't bring myself to explain that our son had chosen something else over his final goodbye. Thunder rolled as I led family members to the front row. The service began. Margaret's life would be honored as she deserved for her decades of love, sacrifice, and kindness. Yet as I straightened my tie, her son's words still rang in my ears, "Not worth my time." The pastor stepped to the podium, Bible open. Margaret's portrait smiled from its frame, surrounded by her favorite lilies. Her eyes in the photo carried the same warmth she had shown at our wedding, at Timothy's first steps, through every challenge we'd faced together. Rain drummed harder on the canopy as the pastor spoke about her devotion, her belief in love, her dedication to family. My phone buzzed against my chest. I tried to ignore it, but the sound returned again and again. Carefully, I checked it. 3 Instagram notifications from Timothy's wife, Sarah. Margaret had once asked me to follow her for travel updates. I tapped the first alert. Bright blue seas, palm trees, laughter, reggae music filled the screen. Perfect day in Miami. Sarah's voice chirped. The location tag confirmed it, Miami Beach, Florida. So this was Timothy's important business. While we buried his mother, while family traveled across states, while I held our broken family together, he was sipping cocktails on a beach. The pastor's words about Margaret's greatest joy, her family, cut deeply. Sarah's video showed drinks with umbrellas, volleyball games, carefree laughter, a world away from this somber farewell. I wanted to shout the truth, to expose the reality of our son's betrayal. Instead, I slipped the phone back into my pocket, keeping my face composed. Margaret deserved dignity, not disruption, but every phrase about her devotion felt like a wound reopening. She had believed love could heal, but some wounds were too deep. As the pastor finished, and her former principal stepped up to speak, the funeral director caught my eye, assuming my distress was only grief. If only it were that simple. Rain continued to fall, steady and unrelenting. Meanwhile, in Florida. But in Florida, the sun was bright. The weather was perfect for leisure, while Margaret's body waited to be lowered into the cold earth. I murmured something about needing fresh air to my sister, who squeezed my hand in quiet understanding. I walked steadily toward the maintenance shed, anger building with each step, fueled by the contrast between Sarah's cheerful video and the reality of this gray, rain-soaked morning. For 37 years, Margaret had loved that boy. She stayed up during fevers, applauded at school plays, sat proudly at graduations, rehearsed job interviews, offered relationship advice he never followed. She defended him when friends asked why he never visited, forgave his absence at holidays, sent packages to his expensive Manhattan apartment. This was how he repaid her memory. Behind the shed, away from the ceremony's soft voices, I pulled out my phone. My hands shook, not from nerves, but from anger, the kind I hadn't felt since Timothy wrecked the car at 17. Back then, Margaret had calmed me. Now I faced it alone. I jabbed at his number, dialing hard. 1 ring, 2, he answered. What now, Dad? That familiar tone of annoyance. Timothy, I just saw your wife's video from Miami Beach. Silence, then faint vacation noise. That's not what you think, Dad. Sarah's just don't lie to me. My voice echoed off the shed. You're at the beach while we bury your mother. Pause, then his voice, flat and unashamed. Fine, yes, I'm in Florida. So what? This funeral is a waste of my time. The words cut deeper because now I had proof. While relatives sat under canopies, while flowers drooped in the rain, while Margaret's body lay waiting for her final rest, her son enjoyed palm trees and cocktails. She gave birth to you. She defended you when no one else would. She's gone, Dad. His voice was cold. Standing around crying won't change that. I've got a life to live. The cruelty of it stopped me in place. A life to live. As if Margaret's death was only an inconvenience on his vacation schedule. Rain streamed down my face, mixing with tears I hadn't realized were there. From the distance came the principal's voice, sharing stories of Margaret's dedication to her students. Stories Timothy would never hear. You're not my son anymore. The words escaped before I could stop them, final as a gavel strike. Good, don't call me again. He hung up. I stared at the screen and redialed. Once straight to voicemail. Again, the number you are calling is not available. A third attempt, this caller has been blocked. He had blocked me. While Margaret lay in her casket yards away, while family gathered to honor her life, my son cut me off entirely to protect his vacation. I tried again. The same rejection. The device he used to flaunt his paradise now served as a wall, deliberate and impenetrable. Thunder boomed as rain poured harder. Behind me, the service carried on. Probably Thurman was speaking about our double dates 40 years ago, when Margaret wore yellow sundresses and Timothy existed only in our hopes for children. My phone felt heavy in my palm, its rain-streaked screen reflecting my distorted face. Blocked, dismissed, just like Margaret's memory. The shed offered no real shelter, yet I stayed, letting the rain soak my jacket. In Florida, the sun still shone. Sarah was probably posting another video, recording their perfect day while we endured imperfect grief. At last, I walked back toward the gathering, shoes sinking in the mud. The mourners remained under the canopy, listening with patience and love. Timothy's empty chair in the front row mocked them all. Margaret had insisted it be left open, always hoping he might surprise us. Hope, she called it. But I was learning hope could wound as much as it healed. It kept me dialing this morning when I knew he didn't care. It kept his contact saved as Timothy, son, as if a label could preserve a relationship already gone. As I neared, my sister gestured to the empty chair. The ceremony was drawing to a close. I could see it in the way people shifted for the final words. I took my seat among Margaret's true family, the ones who chose to be there despite grief, rain, and discomfort. They deserved my attention. Margaret deserved better than a son who valued the beach over her memory. The pastor returned to the podium, offering closing remarks I barely absorbed. My thoughts stayed fixed on that automated message. This caller has been blocked. Some wounds, I realized, were beyond the reach of Margaret's belief in love. Step by step, I forced myself back into the ceremony, wearing the mask of appropriate grief. The pastor's voice carried across the gathering as I slipped quietly back into my seat beside my sister, who squeezed my hand without looking away from the podium. Margaret devoted her life to nurturing young minds, he said, his tone warm with affection. She believed every child deserved patience, understanding, and unconditional support. My sister leaned close, whispering, "Margaret was so proud of Timothy. Remember how she showed everyone his marketing awards, those certificates from New York?" My throat tightened. She always saw the best in him. "He must be devastated to miss this," my sister added. "Traffic from New York can be terrible." I stared at Margaret's casket, white lilies trembling in the breeze. "He had obligations he couldn't avoid," I lied, the words bitter. What else could I say? That her nephew chose cocktails over her farewell, that he dismissed 37 years of motherhood as not worth his time. When Timothy was 8, my sister continued, oblivious to my inner conflict, Margaret spent weeks helping him with that science project. Remember the volcano that erupted in the kitchen? The memory struck hard. Timothy's excited face, flour and baking soda covering the counters. Margaret laughing as she cleaned the mess. "Daddy, when will Mama get better?" I made her a drawing. 8-year-old Timothy had asked during her brief illness that year. Such simple love, such pure concern. She never missed one of his school presentations, my sister whispered. Even with the flu, she still showed up. More memories came uninvited. Margaret driving through a snowstorm to reach him when pneumonia struck at college, missing her own sister's birthday to attend his presentations, defending him when friends wondered why he never visited. 2 years ago, when the doctor gave Margaret her diagnosis, her first words were about Timothy. "How do we tell him?" she whispered, clutching my hand in that sterile office. That night I called, steadying my voice. "Son, your mother has some health issues. Can you visit this weekend?" "Dad, work is crazy. Tell Mom I'm thinking of her. I'll try to call later." He never did. The pattern repeated for months. Short calls, distracted tone, visits that shifted from monthly to rare, then to nothing. Always an excuse, deadlines, meetings, opportunities. Margaret excused him each time. "He's scared, Otis. Death frightens young people." Even as she weakened, relying on me for simple tasks, she defended his absence. "Maybe he'll come for Thanksgiving," she whispered last November. "He's building his life. That's what children do." But sitting here now, surrounded by dozens who had made time to honor her, I knew the truth Margaret never admitted. Timothy wasn't building a life. He was abandoning the one that included us. "Promise me you'll understand him," Margaret had begged in her final weeks. "He loves us in his own way," as if love could be measured in excuses and empty promises. The pastor concluded his remarks. The mourners stood for prayer. I rose automatically, body following ritual while my mind replayed those painful months of Margaret fading as Timothy stayed away. Voices rose in unison, but in my head echoed his words from hours earlier. "This whole thing isn't worth my time." My sister dabbed her eyes. She was blessed to have such a devoted family, she murmured. Devoted, the word echoed cruel and hollow. Margaret had been devoted to a son who had blocked his father's number to protect his vacation, to a man incapable of devotion in return. The ceremony drew to a close, and I still didn't know how to explain Timothy's absence to the relatives who asked. How could I honor Margaret's memory while hiding the truth that she had died hoping to see him one more time? The pastor's words faded, and my mind drifted back to that October morning 2 years earlier. Dr. Martinez had arranged files neatly, her face carrying that practiced neutrality doctors use for devastating news. "The cancer has spread more than we thought," she said gently. "We're looking at months, not years." Margaret's hand found mine. "How do we tell Timothy?" Even then, her first concern was shielding our son. That evening, I called him. "Son, your mother needs treatment right away." "What kind of treatment?" Genuine concern, just for a moment. "Chemotherapy. It'll be tough, but she's strong." "Well, keep me posted. I'm sure she'll beat it." Posted, as if her life was a casual update. At first he visited twice, bringing expensive flowers, staying for dinner. He seemed engaged, asking about treatments, side effects, prognosis. Margaret glowed under his attention, chatting about his work, his apartment, his ambition. But as treatments wore her down, his visits turned into obligations. 2 hours, no more. Flowers, small talk, then excuses, meetings, flights. He's just focused on his career. Margaret insisted. By month 6, the visits ended. Calls became brief exchanges. How's mom? She's fighting. Good. Tell her I love her. Click. Those months. I learned to be both husband and caregiver. Learning to prepare soft meals Margaret could manage. Learning to coordinate pill schedules, handle insurance paperwork, drive to countless appointments while keeping notes on treatments I barely grasped. The hospital visits were the hardest. Sitting beside Margaret during chemotherapy, watching chemicals drip into her veins while she forced a smile to ease my worry. Other patients had rotating visitors. Children, siblings, friends, while we only had each other. That felt complete, until I realized it wasn't enough. Could Timothy visit this weekend? Margaret asked one gray December afternoon, adjusting her headscarf as she tried to sit straighter. I'm having a good day. I'd like him to see me better. I dialed his number, my hands shaking more with anger than nerves. Dad, things are insane here. A client wants revisions by Monday, and I'm already behind. Your mother specifically asked for you. She's stronger today. That's good to hear. Tell her I'll definitely come soon. Maybe next month when work settles down. But work never settled. Timothy's excuses grew more polished, more final. Presentations, deadlines, opportunities too important to pause for family. Margaret stopped asking directly, though I'd see her glance at her phone when it buzzed, hoping for his call. She'd smile when I mentioned his name, then avoid asking when he might arrive. The final months blurred into helplessness. Margaret needed aid with daily tasks, showering, dressing, eating food she no longer wanted. I moved her bed to the living room so she could still watch her garden, see the birds outside the feeder. Maybe Timothy could come for Thanksgiving, she whispered one November night, her voice barely above the hum of the oxygen machine. I called again, dropping any subtlety. Son, your mother is dying. She wants to see you. How long does she have? Doctors say weeks, maybe a month. I'll try to arrange something. Work's crazy, but family comes first. Family comes first. The words sounded rehearsed, automatic. Did he even hear himself? Thanksgiving came and went. Margaret was too weak to eat, but insisted I turn on the football games Timothy loved. She dozed, waking now and then to ask if he'd called. He hadn't. December marked her decline. She slept most days, waking only for medicine or brief conversations that felt borrowed from time. She still asked about Timothy, but indirectly. Is he working hard? Does he sound happy? Tell him his mother loves him. By then I'd stopped calling. What was the point? Timothy had made his choice months earlier. Promise me you'll understand him, Margaret whispered in what became our last real conversation. Death frightens young people. He'll regret this someday. Regret, as if absence was fear, and not deliberate selfishness. Margaret passed on a Tuesday morning in January, her hand warm in mine as dawn crept through the window. I held her as she took her last breath, whispering reassurances about Timothy's love we both knew weren't true. My first call was to him. Dad, is everything okay? It's early. She's gone, son. Your mother died an hour ago. Silence. Then I'll handle the arrangements from here. I know people. People. Not I'll come home. Not, I need to be there. Just people who could take care of things while he continued his life. The sound of folding chairs pulled me back to the present. Attendees rose, gathering coats, preparing to move toward the graveside. Margaret's casket waited, ringed by white lilies that reminded me of her garden, her hope, her faith in a son who had left her behind. I rose too, accepting condolences from relatives who had no idea their nephew had chosen leisure over her farewell. Family members approached with soft touches, quiet words, and hopeful glances toward the parking lot, still expecting Timothy to arrive late but apologetic. Margaret would be so proud of this turnout. Cousin Robert said, gripping my shoulder. She touched so many lives. Thank you for being here, I answered automatically, the phrase rehearsed after countless repetitions. Ma stood beside me, clutching her purse, scanning the crowd. Shouldn't we wait for Timothy? He must be caught in traffic. Before I could offer another excuse, a familiar voice cut through the quiet. Otis. Thurman Hayes stood a few feet away, his weathered hands folded, wearing his navy jacket and the same steady expression he wore at job sites when a problem needed fixing. We'd worked construction together for 15 years before I moved into engineering, shared coffee breaks, shared frustrations. Thurman, I shook his hand, surprised by his strong grip, the way he held on a moment longer. I've known you 40 years, he said quietly, scanning the crowd. Where's Timothy? I didn't see him during the service. The blunt question caught me off guard. Others had asked gently, but Thurman's friendship carried the right to expect truth. He couldn't make it, I said heavily. He's in Florida. Florida today? For what? I glanced around to ensure we weren't overheard. Mourners were moving toward the graveside, voices subdued. Vacation, said the funeral wasn't worth his time. The silence between us stretched. Thurman's face barely changed, but his eyes shifted, disappointment mixed with recognition, as if he'd expected this but hoped otherwise. Margaret would be heartbroken, he said at last. She never got to say goodbye. The words escaped before I could stop them, carrying 2 years of bottled anger, 2 years of treatments, Thurman, 2 years of her asking for him, making excuses for him, believing he'd show up when it mattered. Thurman nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the casket. I've watched you support that boy for decades. When does it end? What do you mean? I mean some lessons can only be learned the hard way. His voice carried the weight of experience, shaped by years of seeing friends, weather family struggles and disappointments. Margaret had always shielded Timothy from consequences, making excuses, smoothing over conflicts, covering his failures. I thought of his childhood. Margaret rushing to school when he forgot assignments, calling his boss when he overslept, defending him when friends felt abandoned. She'd called it supporting his potential. Looking back, it was closer to enabling his selfishness. She wanted me to understand him, I said, to forgive him. Understanding someone doesn't mean approving everything they do. Thurman shifted his stance, slow and deliberate. I had a brother who gambled away his family's savings, he said. My mother kept rescuing him, believing love meant never giving up. You know what happened? I shook my head. He never learned. He kept gambling because the consequences never stayed with him. Sometimes the most caring act is letting people face the results of their choices. Around us, the crowd was dispersing. Some walking to their cars, others toward the burial site. Cemetery staff folded chairs with practiced efficiency. The ceremony's formality was giving way to the reality of grief, logistics, and family duties. What are you suggesting? I asked. Thurman studied me for a long moment before speaking. Margaret left him something in the will, didn't she? The house is yours, but there's money. Her pension, some investments. She wanted Timothy secure, even after he abandoned her. The question lingered between us. Margaret had revised her will in her final weeks, making sure Timothy would inherit enough to sustain his lifestyle. She called it faith in his future. I saw it as one last effort to buy the affection he never freely gave. She believed he'd change, I said. Thought responsibility might mature him. And you? What do you believe? Thurman asked. I watched the funeral director coordinate the casket's movement, his staff quietly professional as they prepared for Margaret's final rest. Soon she'd be lowered into the plot I'd purchased 2 decades earlier, when death felt distant and Timothy still called every Sunday. I believe some people don't change until they have to, I admitted. Thurman nodded. Don't let this pass, Otis. Don't let him think his mother's death doesn't matter. Some lessons can only be learned the hard way. He gripped my shoulder firmly once, then walked toward his truck without looking back. I stood alone among scattered programs and wilting flowers, his words repeating, "Don't let this pass." The graveside service would start soon. Margaret's farewell, attended by all who loved her, except the one person she most wanted there. Slowly I walked toward my car, keys in hand but not starting the engine. Through the windshield I saw relatives scanning the lot, some perhaps still hoping Timothy's delayed flight might have arrived. Others clustered near their cars, waiting for direction. What comes next? That seemed to be the question Margaret left me with, along with a house full of memories and a son who had blocked my number to protect his vacation from interruption. I sat in the driver's seat, key in the ignition but unmoving, replaying Thurman's words about lessons and consequences. Somewhere in Florida, Timothy was likely posting another beach photo while his mother's body waited for burial, living his best life while ignoring the one that had given him everything. Margaret's voice echoed in memory. "Promise me you'll understand him." But as Thurman had reminded me, understanding doesn't mean excusing every action. The 30-minute drive home dragged like hours. I sat in the driveway 10 minutes before turning off the engine, staring at the house Margaret and I had shared for 28 years. The afternoon sun cast familiar shadows across the porch, but everything felt different now, emptier, like a stage after the actors had left. I unlocked the front door, the keys heavy and unfamiliar in my hand. The house met me with silence so complete, it seemed to press against my ears until I cleared my throat just to hear something. Margaret's reading glasses still rested on the counter beside her crossword book. Her coffee mug waited clean in the dish rack, ready for a morning that would never come. I touched its rim, remembering how she drank her coffee too hot, blowing across the surface while teasing me for patience. Upstairs, I loosened my black tie and carefully removed the funeral suit. Each piece felt like armor finally shed. The jacket that contained my anger, the shirt that absorbed my tears, the pants that carried me through the hardest day of my life. I slipped into jeans and Margaret's favorite sweater of mine, the blue wool one she'd given me 3 Christmases ago. It still carried a trace of her perfume from the last time she hugged me while I wore it. Downstairs, I made coffee on instinct, hands guided by habit. 2 scoops, not 3. Margaret had always preferred it weaker. When the pot finished brewing, I noticed I had pulled down 2 mugs, hers and mine, as I had done every morning for decades. The sight of that second cup, waiting for someone who would never need it again, nearly undid me. I returned it to the cabinet, filled my own, and wandered into the living room. Photographs lined every surface. Our wedding day, Margaret radiant in lace, me terrified but trying to look confident. Timothy's high school graduation, all 3 of us proud and full of promise. His college orientation, where Margaret tried to hide her tears. The later photos told another story. Timothy's marketing awards ceremonies, where we drove hours to applaud achievements better known to his colleagues than to us. His New York apartment warming, where he seemed embarrassed by our presence among his friends. Last Christmas, the final time he visited. His smile strained, his attention fixed on his phone. 40 years I raised that boy, I said aloud to Margaret's favorite chair. 40 years of Little League games where you cheered the loudest. School plays where you brought flowers even when he forgot his lines. The chair didn't answer, but I could almost hear her voice. "He's just building his career, Otis. Young people need to focus on their futures. But when does building a future stop being an excuse for abandoning the past?" I asked the empty room. When does ambition become selfishness? I sank into Margaret's chair, rarely touched while she was alive. It still held the imprint of her frame, still smelled faintly of lavender lotion she used each night. From here she had watched her garden bloom, graded stacks of papers, read countless books. Thurman's words echoed once more. Some lessons can only be learned the hard way. Margaret had shielded Timothy from consequences his entire life. Forgotten homework became her urgent trips to school. Missed deadlines became her phone calls to sympathetic teachers. Failed responsibilities became our financial cushions and emotional safety nets, endless second chances. Even in her illness, she excused his absence. He quote, "Just afraid," she'd said quietly, after another missed visit. Death unsettles the young, as though fear excused neglect, as though being nervous gave him permission to let his mother face the end alone, with only a weary husband beside her. I picked up a photo from Timothy's college graduation, studying his features for hints of the man he'd grown into. At 18, he still embraced us freely, still called every Sunday to share stories of school, friends, and the future we had encouraged. When had that changed? When had our son become someone who chose a Florida beach over his mother's funeral? The shift hadn't come all at once. Looking back, I could trace the gradual cooling, conversations shortening, visits feeling like duties, our presence treated more as an inconvenience than family. Margaret had sensed it too, though she never admitted it. I often caught her waiting by the phone on Sundays, hoping for calls that arrived later and later until they stopped entirely. She spoke his name with cautious optimism, hoping each day might be the one he remembered us. "You always believed in him, sweetheart," I whispered to her photograph even after he stopped believing in us. Afternoon light stretched shadows across the living room. I knew I should eat, should call my sister to say I was home safely, should begin thanking people for their condolences. Instead, I sat in Margaret's chair, holding our son's graduation photo, accepting what she never wanted to say aloud. Timothy had left us long before today. Today he had simply made it clear. Thurman had been right. Some lessons are only learned the hard way. The question was whether I had the strength to teach them. I opened the laptop, my decision settling with each second. The desktop appeared, a photo of Margaret in her garden last spring, when she still had the energy to plant roses she would never see bloom. The bank login required passwords, security checks, verification codes. I had set up our accounts years ago, back when Margaret trusted me to manage the finances while she focused on teaching and family. That trust now had a different purpose. The bank's interface appeared with familiar efficiency: checking, savings, mortgage, utilities, all the routine structure of decades together. I navigated to the recurring payments tab with practiced precision. There it was, recurring payment. $3,200 monthly to Timothy Cole's mortgage account. Next due date, April 30th, 2025. Total payments sent 96 transfers. 8 years. Every one of them representing Margaret's hope that our son would value the sacrifice. Every one of them proving that love without reciprocity becomes dependence. I clicked into the payment history and watched years of transfers scroll past. March 2025, $3,200. February, $3,200. January, $3,200. Sent while Margaret was dying and Timothy didn't visit. My calculator confirmed what I had already worked out. $3,200 times 12 months times 8 years, $307,200. That money could have funded the European trip Margaret dreamed of, renovated the kitchen she talked about for years, or supported students in need instead of financing one ungrateful son's lifestyle. I scrolled back further, finding Timothy's original email from 2017. "Dad, I know this is a big ask, but the New York market is impossible. If you could help with the mortgage until I'm settled, I promise I'll repay you once my career takes off." 8 years later, his career had flourished. His social media showed fine dining, luxury vacations, designer brands, but repayment was never mentioned. "Well, Timothy," I said to the screen, "you decided the funeral wasn't worth your time. Let's see if your mortgage is worth mine." I clicked Manage Recurring Payment and read the cancellation terms. Immediate effect. No grace period, no warning beyond the bank's standard notice. The screen asked, "Are you sure you want to cancel this recurring payment?" Beneath, in smaller text, "This action cannot be undone. Future payments will not be sent." I thought of Margaret's words, "Promise me you'll take care of Timothy." I had for 35 years, fed him, clothed him, educated him, supported his goals, sustained his lifestyle, even enabled his selfishness. I had taken such thorough care that he never learned to care for himself or for others. Perhaps now was the time for him to learn. I clicked yes, cancel payment. Confirmation appeared instantly. Recurring payment canceled, effective immediately. A confirmation email arrived within seconds. Timothy's mortgage account would no longer receive automatic transfers. 8 years of support ended with 2 clicks. I leaned back in the chair, feeling something I hadn't in months. Lightness, not the emptiness of loss, but the relief of laying down a burden. For the first time since Margaret's diagnosis, I was no longer carrying someone else's obligations. Timothy would see his bank's notification within a day. His next mortgage was due in 2 weeks. Enough time to panic, enough time to realize his father wouldn't cover this problem. He would likely call once his safety net was gone, but his number remained blocked on my phone, and I had no plans to change that. Some conversations must be earned, and Timothy had much to earn. The laptop dimmed, asking if I wanted to continue. I closed the banking site and shut it down, setting it aside with the quiet satisfaction of a task finished. $300,000 gone. Margaret would understand. She wanted me to care for Timothy, but she also taught her students that choices had consequences. That responsibility required practice. Tonight, Timothy was practicing responsibility for his own mortgage. Tomorrow we would see how closely he had been listening. I walked to the refrigerator with lighter steps than I'd taken in months, opening it to see options rather than duties. Margaret had always planned our meals, ensuring nutrition, making sure I ate, even when grief dulled my appetite. Tonight, for the first time since Margaret's passing, I felt truly hungry. Eggs, butter, fresh bread, simple ingredients for a simple meal. I cracked 3 eggs into a bowl, whisking until smooth and golden, remembering her gentle teasing about my famous scrambled eggs. "Only man I know who makes them fluffy as clouds," she'd said. And tonight they were. I set the table with our good china, the wedding dishes we had saved for rare occasions. If enjoying my first calm meal in months didn't qualify, nothing would. The plates glowed warmly under the kitchen light, reflecting a satisfaction I'd nearly forgotten. "First time in months I can actually taste my food," I said aloud, savoring each bite. The eggs were light, the toast crisp, the butter real, not the low-fat kind Margaret had insisted on. Small comforts returned, along with the freedom to enjoy them. After dinner, I moved into the living room and settled into Margaret's chair with the remote. She had always chosen our evening programs, often classics that reminded her of childhood. Tonight, I selected one of her favorites, a Cary Grant comedy that had made her laugh even in her illness. "Remember this one, sweetheart?" I asked her photo on the table. "You always said he could charm his way out of anything. Maybe you'd approve of a little charm against Timothy for once." Familiar dialogue filled the room, bringing comfort instead of sadness. Her presence felt lighter, less like absence and more like quiet approval, as though she understood that love sometimes meant difficult choices. My phone rested powered off beside me. For months I'd kept it close, waiting for updates about her health or brief, strained calls from Timothy. Tonight, I wanted silence. No interruptions, no disappointments. "Strange how much lighter the house feels tonight," I murmured, surprised at the truth. Margaret's death had filled every room with emptiness, but Timothy's rejection had cleared the air. No more waiting for calls, no more excuses for the inexcusable. The movie ended at 10, later than I had managed in weeks, but earlier than usual. I turned off the television and went upstairs, moving through a bedtime routine that had seemed impossible since the funeral. Brushing my teeth, I caught my reflection. Not happiness, but peace. The calm that follows a hard choice made rightly. In the bedroom I undressed slowly, hanging my clothes the way Margaret always insisted. "Clothes last longer when you treat them well," she'd say. Tonight, the familiar routine felt like honoring her wisdom. I slipped into clean sheets, changed yesterday for visitors. Lying in the dark, I heard only the house settling. No racing thoughts about Timothy's problems. No anxiety about calls I dreaded. Just quiet. Wonder how long it will take him to notice. I asked the ceiling, curiosity replacing worry. Rolling to Margaret's side of the bed, I whispered, "Sleep well, love. Justice is coming." For the first time since her passing, I smiled before drifting into deep, unbroken rest. Outside, Chicago moved into its nighttime rhythm, but inside, peace had returned. Tomorrow would bring Timothy's realization, his panic, his scramble to fix the financial safety net he had relied on. But tonight belonged to me, to rest, to satisfaction, to the quiet recognition that choices finally carried consequences. Margaret would have understood. She had spent decades teaching children that responsibility was learned through experience, that actions mattered. Timothy's lesson was about to begin. The past week had been the calmest in years. I spent mornings in her garden, afternoons sorting her things with care, evenings reading the books I had set aside during her illness. For the first time since her diagnosis, I slept entire nights without waking to check on her. Then Timothy's name appeared on my phone. I let it ring 3 times, debating whether to answer. Part of me was curious about what problem had finally driven him to unblock my number. Another part wanted to let it ring, to give him a taste of the silence he had imposed. Mostly, I felt nothing. No anger, no fear, just mild interest in how long it would take him to face reality. On the 4th ring, I picked up. "Dad, hey." His voice carried the casual tone of childhood, the one he used when asking for rides or money, certain both would come. "Sorry I blocked you last week. I just needed some space after, you know." "I understand," I said, settling back in Margaret's chair with my coffee. Good. Listen, I'm back from Florida now, and there's this weird issue with my mortgage. The bank says my April payment wasn't made. Your automatic transfer must have glitched." The assumption was remarkable. No mention of the funeral he had skipped. No acknowledgement of his mother's burial. Just an expectation that I would fix his problem. "It wasn't a glitch," I replied. A pause. Papers shuffled in the background. Likely statements he had never bothered to review. "What do you mean? Can you just call them and sort it out?" "No. That's your responsibility now, Timothy." The silence stretched. His tone shifted from casual to uneasy. "My responsibility? Dad, you've always handled this." "What's going on?" "What's going on," I said evenly, "is exactly what you told me last week." "What are you talking about?" His voice grew frantic, the rustling louder as he searched for answers. "You said your mother's funeral wasn't worth your time. Well, your mortgage isn't worth mine." The silence that followed was absolute, and for once it felt like resolution. Finally starting to see that choices had consequences. "You can't be serious," he said, his voice rising in panic. "This is about Mom's funeral." "Dad, that was emotional. This is real money we're talking about. Your mother was real, Timothy. Her love for you was real. Her hope that you'd visit in her final weeks was real. I was focused on my career. I couldn't just drop everything every time she had a bad day. Every bad day. 2 years of cancer treatments, of watching her weaken and fade, reduced to minor interruptions in his schedule. She died waiting for you to call," I said. "Do you know that? During her last week, she asked every day if you'd phoned. I kept covering for you because I couldn't bring myself to tell her the truth, that her son couldn't find 5 minutes for his dying mother. That's not fair. I sent flowers. I called when I could, twice in 6 months, both times only to ask about her prognosis, never to speak with her directly." The rustling papers stopped. In the silence, his shallow breathing came through the line. Reality was breaking into the comfort zone he'd lived in for years. "Look, I made mistakes, okay, but you can't punish me by ruining my financial security. I'm not punishing you. I'm just no longer enabling you." "Enabling? Dad, you promised you'd help with my mortgage." "A promise is a promise." The irony was striking. Timothy, who broke every promise to his dying mother, demanding I honor mine. "And you promised to be there for your family," I replied. "You promised to visit your mother. You promised to call more. Promises work both ways, son. This is different. That was emotional. This is money. This is real." There it was, his true mindset. Emotions optional. Relationships convenient. But money untouchable. Margaret's final months were dismissed as emotional stuff, while his mortgage was the only real thing. I looked out the window at Margaret's garden, where spring flowers were blooming despite her absence. She had always believed in Timothy's potential, defended him, excused him, and hoped he would become the man she raised him to be. She had been wrong. "Goodbye, Timothy," I said. "Dad, wait. You can't just..." I ended the call and immediately blocked his number. watching the confirmation appear, contact blocked. The same message he once showed me when his vacation mattered more than his mother's funeral. The house felt quieter, but it was a better quiet, the calm that comes with decisions made and consequences accepted. Outside, Margaret's roses bloomed just as she planted them, strong and thriving without needing help from anyone who didn't truly care. Minutes later, Timothy's name appeared again, this time from a different number, likely his work line. I answered on the first ring, curious to see how far desperation would push him. "Don't hang up on me," he snapped, voice higher now, like the tantrums of his childhood when things didn't go his way. "I wasn't planning to," I said, settling back into Margaret's chair. "This deserves full attention. You can't just stop paying my mortgage. Do you understand what this does to me?" "I understand completely. What I don't understand is why you think you're entitled to $3,000 of my money every month. Because you promised when I moved to New York. You said you'd help until I was established. That was 8 years ago, Timothy. Your 6-figure salary and last year's bonus could have covered 2 years of payments. When exactly were you planning to get established?" The question hung in the air. His heavy breathing betrayed pacing, as if searching for an argument that could restore his safety net. "It's not about the money," he said finally. "It's about family. Family helps each other." The irony was sharp. Timothy, who turned away when family needed him most, lecturing me about support. "You're right," I said. "Family does help. When Margaret was dying, your family needed you. Where were you?" "I was working, building a future. You know how competitive my field is." "And when she died, your family needed you at her funeral. Where were you?" "I needed time to process. I couldn't just drop everything and fly to Chicago. You were already in Florida, posting vacation videos while your mother was being buried." Silence again, shorter but heavier, truth settling where excuses once lived. "Fine," he burst out. "I made mistakes. I wasn't perfect. But you can't destroy my life over it. I'm not destroying anything. I'm just no longer building it for you. This is insane. You're supposed to be my father, and she was supposed to be able to count on her son. Margaret defended you for 35 years. She covered for you, excused you, even sent money when you asked. She died believing you loved her." "I did love her. Then why didn't you show up when love meant action instead of words?" His voice cracked. "Because I couldn't handle seeing her like that. Weak, dying, so you left me to handle it alone. You're stronger than me, you always were. I knew you could take care of her." There it was, the truth. Not ambition or fear, but convenience. He left the burden to someone else while he lived comfortably. "She weighed 90 pounds when she died," I said quietly. "From a woman who once gardened for hours, taught 30 children a day, made you lunch for 12 years. She spent her final weeks asking about you, believing you'd still say goodbye. Stop it. She made you promise to understand me, to forgive me, to keep taking care of me after she was gone. And I am honoring her wishes. I'm teaching you what she never could. That love requires responsibility, that family means showing up, that some promises can't be broken without consequences. Dad, please, I'll lose my apartment. I'll lose everything, and I lost my wife. My partner of 37 years, the woman who defended you until her final breath. But somehow your mortgage matters more than her memory. It's not the same thing." "You're right, it's not. Margaret's death is permanent. Your financial setback is temporary. You have steady work, strong credit, and 8 years of mortgage payments I've already covered. You'll figure it out." "What if I don't? What if I can't?" "Then you'll learn what I learned during Margaret's illness, that some struggles are faced alone, some burdens must be carried personally, and certain responsibilities can't be handed to others. I'm your son. You can't abandon me." The claim landed heavily, not because it was true, but because of its deep irony. Timothy, who had abandoned his mother in her final days, now accused his father of abandonment over unpaid bills. "She was your mother," I replied. "And that didn't stop you from walking away when she needed you most." "Fine. I was a terrible son. Is that what you want? I was selfish, weak, and I let her down. But ruining my life won't bring her back. I'm not ruining your life, Timothy. I'm giving you the chance to build one without leaning on my money. Margaret always believed you had potential. Maybe now you'll see if she was right. This is about revenge, isn't it? You want me to suffer because I missed the funeral. This is about fairness. You chose your vacation over your mother's funeral. Now you must choose your own solution to your mortgage. Same principle. Choices bring consequences. Dad, wait. Goodbye, Timothy. I ended the call and blocked the number, watching the screen confirm another contact cut off. 2 numbers gone, however many remained. Each block symbolized his choices: convenience over connection, money over memory, himself above all else. The house sank into silence, but this time it felt complete. No more calls, no more emergencies, no more enabling disguised as care. Timothy would have to learn responsibility the way Margaret always wanted him to, through effort, outcomes, and the understanding that generosity has limits. I glanced at her photograph on the side table, imagining her reaction. She might have been startled at first, but Margaret had been a teacher. She knew some lessons are learned only through experience, and shielding someone from consequences is not the same as protecting them from harm. I think you'd approve, I told her image. Tough love had always been her way, even when she couldn't extend it to him. Outside, evening settled over the neighborhood. Families returned from work, sharing dinners, supporting one another when it mattered. Tomorrow I'd wake without the weight of Timothy's next crisis, next demand, next assumption that his problems were mine to solve. For the first time in 8 years, my money would stay in my account where it belonged. 3 weeks passed without a single call. 3 weeks of the calmest mornings I'd had in years. Coffee tasting like enjoyment instead of duty. Newspapers delivering news instead of dread about Timothy's finances. I filled the time well. Margaret's garden needed attention, and I found unexpected comfort in carrying on her work. The roses she'd planted were flourishing, almost as if her absence had given them space to thrive. The travel agency on Lincoln Avenue had been helpful when I explained my plan, a Mediterranean cruise in June, through the Greek islands Margaret had dreamed of since we watched that travel documentary 5 years ago. She'd marked pages in magazines, researched restaurants in Santorini, and mapped out excursions to ruins she'd studied as a young teacher. This would be ideal for someone starting new, the agent said, arranging brochures like invitations to possibility. My wife always wanted to see the Greek islands, I replied. I think she'd be glad I'm finally making the trip. It's never too late to honor someone's dream. And it wasn't, with $3,000 staying in my account each month, instead of covering Timothy's expenses. Honoring Margaret's dream was now possible. 8 years of mortgage payments translated into years of travel and experiences she'd postponed while we supported our ungrateful son. The bank manager seemed impressed when I opened a new savings account. I labeled it European Cruise Fund, watching deposits replace withdrawals, numbers on a screen now symbols of freedom rather than dependence. My phone stayed blissfully quiet. No urgent calls, no eviction threats, no requests for rescue. Whatever Timothy was doing, he was handling it without me, exactly as it should be. Thurman called twice, checking in with the care of a lifelong friend. I told him about the cruise, the garden, and the peace I'd found since stepping away from Timothy's financial crises. Margaret would be proud, he said. Took you long enough to see what she always knew. What's that? That sometimes love means letting someone learn the hard way. Visiting the cemetery had become a weekly routine. I brought fresh flowers from Margaret's garden to her grave, always with news to share. Well, sweetheart, I said, arranging the blooms against the stone, I booked that cruise you dreamed of. In 6 weeks I'll leave for Athens, then sail to all the islands you circled in the guides. A soft breeze stirred the flowers, as if in approval. Timothy had called a few times after losing his mortgage support, surprised that choices actually carried consequences. Imagine that. I slipped back into the one-sided conversations I'd grown used to since her passing. You always said I was too lenient with him. Turns out you were right. The afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the quiet grounds. Other visitors wandered among headstones, leaving flowers, sharing updates with loved ones who could no longer reply, but who still seemed to listen. $300,000, I continued. That's what we gave him in 8 years. Enough for the kitchen you wanted, the trip you delayed, enough to help deserving students through college instead of enabling one entitled child. Margaret's photo smiled softly from its frame, the same look she wore when a student finally grasped a hard lesson. Patient, firm, always believing growth required effort. She knew then, as I know now, that real love sometimes means saying no. I think you understand why I made this choice, I said. You spent 40 years teaching children that actions have consequences, that responsibility can't be handed off, and that adulthood means managing your own problems. Maybe it's time Timothy finally learned what you always tried to show him. Driving home, I passed the neighborhoods where I'd spent my life, the schools where Margaret had taught, and the communities where we built friendships that will outlast Timothy's resentment. Chicago in late spring was beautiful. Trees budding, families stepping back into the warmth, life beginning its timeless cycle of renewal. At home, I cooked dinner with ingredients chosen for enjoyment rather than necessity, eating slowly while planning tomorrow's garden work. The house felt lighter, free of Timothy's constant needs and demands. On the counter, beside my meal, sat the new passport I'd received just yesterday, crisp, official, ready for the journeys Margaret and I once planned but never took. The cruise itinerary rested nearby, alongside guides to the Greek islands, Roman ruins, and Mediterranean ports, places where civilizations rose and fell, teaching the importance of building something that lasts. Timothy would have to build his life now without my money as a foundation. His success or failure would depend on the qualities Margaret had always tried to instill: resilience, responsibility, and the understanding that love is about giving as well as earning. The evening news murmured in the background. Distant conflicts, local achievements, reminders that life continues regardless of one person's struggles. Somewhere in New York, Timothy was likely searching for an apartment, learning what $3,000 truly means when it comes from his own paycheck, not his father's wallet. I felt no guilt, no urge to step in. Margaret had hoped he would one day become the man she believed he could be. My enabling delayed that growth, but not anymore. Outside, spring leaned towards summer. Margaret's garden bloomed in the colors she had chosen, the fragrances she had loved, the beauty she had cultivated with her own hands. In 6 weeks, I would step onto a ship bound for the places she dreamed of, carrying her memory to islands where ancient wisdom still speaks of the human balance between love and accountability. The phone stayed silent, and the silence was perfect. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To hear the next story, click on the box to the left. Thank you for watching.